Alright, so it's been a while. I have been MIA for like a year now. Um, Maybe a little bit longer. Not that there's a ton of viewers watching these things, but I've still been reading at a much slower pace, like kind of since all the lockdowns are up in most places. But I'm still reading. I'm focusing on some other things in my life, but still getting in a book. About once a month at this point. One of the last ones I finished was Celine's Journey into the End of the Night. And this was an interesting one, and possibly not in a good way. So this book is about 435 pages. And I was motivated to read this because I had heard people talking about it, saying that it was really good and that it represented I don't know, maybe a particularly unique standpoint in like nihilism, or that it did something that most books didn't do at the time it was published, which I think was in the 1940s. Maybe I could have that wrong. If I have it wrong, I'll correct it on a caption. But yeah, so I read this, and couple things I didn't know when I bought it and started reading. I didn't know the history of the author. Not saying I wouldn't have read it had I known, but it just makes a little bit more sense with some chapters. So this book, I guess a brief summary of this book really is that you have a character, Ferdinand, who is essentially just going through life. You know, this book starts off at the beginning of World War One, I think it is. And it goes in, talks about how Ferdinand is, pretty fervent about the war effort, and is excited about it, and patriotic and everything else in between, and is excited to, I guess, like join said war effort. And then it goes from that to him actually being in the war. And it goes from there, and it's just like really a story of his life. This book is semi-autobiographical, and you can tell because it doesn't have much of a plot per se. Narratively speaking, it's sort of point A to point B. So anyway, the book starts off with Ferdinand being fervent. That's a lot of F's. Being fervent about the war effort in France. He joins the war, and he quickly discovers that this is not what he wants to do. He quickly discovers that there is just death and torture that awaits him at the war effort, or at the war front, and it's not as glorious as he thought it would be. During this time, he meets a guy named Robinson, who will come back later in the book. To kind of be, I don't even want to call him his opposite, but just kind of be a consistent character throughout the narrative, unlike everybody else in this book. But essentially, once he's in war, he realizes this is not what he wanted, and I'd heard many people draw comparisons with this book to Catch-22, particularly because it's supposed to be a satire, and it's dark, and it's comedic. But what I found is that, like, I find that the best of this book is during the war sections. That is the portion of this book that I enjoyed the most. That part of his writing, and that part, like, in the earlier part of the book, felt the most resonant with, the sort of, like, critique of war and bureaucracy and things like that. I found it to be the most strong case of writing at that point. From there, we move on to kind of the after-war effort with him kind of being, this is just, I'm just doing one video for this. I'm not doing a spoiler versus not spoiler. I usually will do that, but this one just is getting one just because of the nature of this book. But after the war effort, he winds up injured, and he's kind of like, I think the word is convalescence. That might be the word for when someone's like taking a break from being injured, or not taking a break from being injured, taking a break because they're injured. I think it's convalescence. I don't know, I'll look that up too. But essentially, there's a portion of the book where he's kind of getting rehabilitated, and he's in France, and, like, his views on the war are dramatically different than, like, the citizens, which, I've seen this before in a number of books, between Catch-22 and what else? Catch-22, even All Quiet on the Western Front. Like, you know, plenty of war books have discussed this between like a civilian's fervor for war and a soldier's maybe realistic appraisal of it for what it is. And you know, they touch on that, albeit it's in a maybe a tad more of a comedic tone. This book is weird in that sometimes it feels like things are just occurring. Like, for example, when the main character Ferdinand actually goes from, you know, apostasizing, or I think that's the word, but anyway, singing the praises of war at the beginning of the book to actually being in the war, it's written in such a way that you literally have the character at a cafe with his friend talking about how great this war effort will be, to him joining a parade in celebration of this war effort, to him being in the war. Like, it's written like that. It's not written in a literal sense where he is saying the war is great, he joins a war effort, then he gets shipped off. Like, it's written in this way that like blends, like, I don't even know what style of writing this is called, but if someone was giving you a summary with what is literally happening. So I had to go back and actually read that, because I'm like, oh no, he's actually in the war now. So you have to get used to that in this book. But as you move on, I would say the book's like really kind of broken down into a few different parts. You have the war part, you have the after-war part, you have the time in the Congo. After the Congo, you have the time in Detroit, from Detroit back to France, and then we stay in France, I think, for the remainder of the book. So that being said, after the war part, I had a hard time with this book, getting through it. Once he gets to the Congo, even his way to the Congo, there's a situation with some of the people on the ship that he's taken over. The ship that he is, you know, on board of, that's going over to the Congo. There's a situation where there's a misunderstanding where he thinks that they mean to harm him, and they think that he means like to harm them. And you know, that part of the book is probably like, I don't know, 75 pages of just like this weird paranoia on the ship. And not that that wasn't interesting, it just was like it was interesting in the fact that it seemed like a narrative turn for the book. It seemed like a thematic turn. I was like, okay, well, what's happening now? Like, we're doing this, okay. But like, essentially, like, I feel like the book, what it's doing at that point is it's like emphasizing that people are horrible. And that's kind of like what this book is. This book is just like, people are horrible. Everybody's horrible. No one's good. Everyone's horrible. And you get that feeling on the ship. He gets off the ship. He goes to the Congo. And once he's in the Congo, you know, that section of the book was the hardest for me to get through, because the writing was like, in my opinion, some of the most monotonous, bland writing I had seen in this book. Albeit it is a miserable time for our main character in the Congo. He is suffering, it's hot, you know, everything's dirty, and he does not like it. And the book itself is like I guess it becomes really apparent the author's personal beliefs about people in the Congo, and the author's personal like it becomes really apparent who this author was in real life during the Congo section, because it's filled with probably the most racism I've seen in this book. You know, so like in the entire book, that's like the most overtly racist part of the book is in the Congo. And the thing is that it's not even always just from a character perspective. It's also from like almost a third person detached narrator perspective as well. And I always look at that when I read a book that has like racism in it. I always see like, okay, is the character racist, or is the like omniscient narrator portion of the book also racist? Not to say that you can't have both a racist character, an objective narrator, and still racist author. Not to say that that's not possible, but I do look at that to see like, where's the bigotry coming from? Is the bigotry coming from the character, the narrator, i.e. the author, or both? It's kind of coming from everywhere in that portion of the book. But I found that part I found the Congo portions particularly unenjoyable, not just because of racism, but because they go on for a really long time, and you start asking yourself as a reader, what am I reading, and why am I reading it, and where's it going? And again, like, you know, at that point in the book, there's lots of kind of examples of how terrible other people are, how terrible the French government is being there, how terrible the people of the Congo are, and things like that. Like, you know, there's like this emphasis on that, on how everybody's horrible, but I don't feel like the book gives good enough justification for even what it's saying. I'm not saying that there's any validity in the bigotry that's spewed in this book, but at the same time, like, I'm not even catching where the book is coming from with its thoughts on just humanity and things like that. Obviously, during the war portions, those are a little bit easier to see because it's like, this is horrible. Who wants to, you know, be shot at and see their friends die in front of them? Like, that's pretty easy to grasp. During these sections where his stay in the Congo is horrible and the conditions are horrible, like, I get that, but at the same time, I don't feel like the narrative itself really goes through and tries to, like, justify, like, why is he even there? Why did he go here? He was just looking for a change of pace, I suppose. And again, I will say it is 100% possible that the idea of this book was lost on me. I didn't find it particularly captivating. I found it to be sort of a nihilistic slog. And I do think it's really difficult to write a book that is nihilistic yet not whiny. And I found this to be one of the whiniest books that I've read in a while that is nihilistic. You know, I do enjoy books that, like, sometimes are nihilistic but have a point. This book makes a few points in the course of 430 or so pages, but too few for that page length. From there, we leave the Congo and we go to Detroit, and things get more interesting. There's portions of this book that I do not believe are meant to be taken literally, such as, like, even him moving from cafe to war effort. I don't think that's meant to be taken literally necessarily, but it is written as if it happened that way. Another portion of this book is when he gets to Detroit and he's counting, I think he's like counting fleas or counting ticks. That's like his job or something like that. And again, this portion, I'm like, okay, wait, is this happening or is this not happening? Like, it's like this book exists in a weird reality, and maybe that's the satire portions, but, like, from what I understand, and maybe all satires, I'm sure all satires differ, but what I understand is, like, usually, I guess the satire I enjoy is supposed to be like, oh, you could believe this actually happening, or it's so ridiculous that it could be true, whereas this just feels weird and out of place when he's counting ticks for a job. Anyway, he counts ticks for a job. He ends up kind of escaping the ship that he's on, where he's supposed to be counting ticks, and just becomes like a citizen of Detroit. And he reconnects with an old flame. And there's parts of the book where it feels like Ferdinand is written like a real character. And I did find that he had an ongoing romance with this lady whose name I totally forget, but with this lady that he met after the war, and, you know, he meets her in Detroit, and he has pretty horrible things to say. And, you know, up until the point in the book, we just found horrible things happening to Ferdinand. It was terrible thing after terrible thing. The war was horrible. The Congo was horrible. The tick counting was horrible. And now he's in Detroit. You know, he's trying to reconnect with this old flame. And we find that, like, he wants money or whatever. And he's like, in this portion of the book, you find that he's actually pretty resentful of her, and he does not like her, and you see his actual character. And maybe you saw his character before, but I just didn't catch it. But at this point in the story, I started to notice, like, okay, Ferdinand is horrible also. So it's not just the environment that's terrible or the horrible things that are occurring to him or happening to him. But anyway, he connects with this lady. Or no, this isn't actually in Detroit. Sorry, scratch that. This isn't in Detroit. He connects with her in New York, actually. And then from there, he moves to Detroit. There is a portion in Detroit where he does actually seem his most human and most settled with a prostitute that he meets in Detroit. And they actually have a really romantic relationship somewhat. for reasons that I don't understand, he winds up, not being able to be with her because he wants to go back to France. He finds he wants to go back to France after running into Robinson, and Robinson also, he also met with Robinson in the Congo as well. And it wasn't going well for him either. Robinson's kind of like a few steps ahead, sort of in this way. From there, he moves, from Detroit, he breaks it off with the lady he actually connected with. And again, I found that portion where he's in Detroit, he's working at Ford Motor Company, and things are going kind of well. He's working at Ford Motor Company. He finds that him being a doctor, because he's actually like a medical doctor, but he finds that's like not really too useful because he's going to be working on an assembly line. And they do talk about some portions of the assembly line and how like it's like not great, and it's like mentally like just disparaging. Like there's just nothing about it. Like you are made to do one thing and one thing only. So I found those portions of the book to be good. And that's the hard part about this book is like in pieces. Like if someone just took a quote out of this book and they showed it to me, I might be like, oh, that's really good. I really enjoy that. So cool. Well, let's see what the book is about. But the book itself has such a length about it that you think like, wow, this should have been like about half as long. Like if it was just half as long, I would have enjoyed this probably a lot more, because it's not that this book is entirely valueless, it's that it overstays its welcome, in my opinion. But anyway, back to Ford Motor Company. So he's working there. He's connected with his girlfriend, who is a sex worker. He ends up leaving Detroit to go back to France for reasons that, again, I don't quite understand. I'm sure the book kind of went over it. It's just like he makes the decision after he runs into Robinson. Robinson's going back to France, and he decides to go back. And when he goes back, he decides to practice medicine. And this portion of the book is when he's back in France. He's in a poor neighborhood. I forgot what it was called, but he's in a poor neighborhood, and he meets the locals who he does not like, and they don't like him. He is a doctor, and he works with a very underserved population, and he hates them. He hates them so much. He hates that they're poor, and he's also poor. But that being said, this contrast is interesting because in the book, at the beginning of the book, when he's in the war, he talks about how the first people that the government will reach out to when there's someone to fight for a war is poor people. And and then so it's kind of like more pro not having money. And then once he's a doctor in France and he's working with a poor population and needs healthcare, he's a lot more I hate the poor, they're lazy, and I hate these people. So the perspectives do change, and I think that's kind of cool. I did think that was kind of cool. I don't agree with that, but I think that's kind of cool in that it's probably true to life for a lot of people where when they don't have money, they are more so hey, supportive of people who have less, and then when they have money or when they have a profession that maybe allows them to obtain money, then they feel a little bit more hey, people that can't afford what I do are A, B, C, and D. Not saying that it's true or anything like that, but I think that sentiment can be true for certain people, not for me. So that being said, so he's back in France. He's working in the medical profession, and his friend Robinson is living somewhat locally, and he just hates it, and he hates everybody in his I guess I'll call it neighborhood. He hates everybody in his village. He constantly is doing medical care for free. And he notices that people, to an extent, I think that everybody does deserve to get paid for the labor that they do. But I do think that there are essential services that people need, and that not everybody has money to afford those essential services. So it is very difficult. But he hates everyone, and he strikes up sort of a relationship, not like an intimate relationship, but sort of like a friendship with a boy's aunt and the boy himself, and that's going sort of well. She's the concierge to his building, and unfortunately the boy gets sick, and he's not able to save the boy, and that's actually a really heartfelt part of the book, and I think it's really sad, and the main character Ferdinand himself seems a little bit detached, and maybe that's just like the whole book. The whole book is sort of detached. But that being said, like that part of the book feels really human. It feels nihilistic in a way that isn't whiny. It feels real, and you feel for the aunt, you feel for Ferdinand even, and you feel for the boy who got sick. But after that, there's various things that occur in this book where people are getting sick and dying, and he's not able to treat them in a proper way, so they die and pass. And like again, probably the relationship with the boy is probably the most prominent death that occurs under his like care. From there, Ferdinand actually meets a couple who is living with the husband's mom, I think it is, and they are intent on shipping the mom out to a elder care facility, but the mom doesn't want to go. She's like, you won't ship me off. She feels perfectly fine. But the couple, particularly the wife of the couple, feels burdened by the mom. And that's probably, I would say that's probably the most interesting part of this book, is this couple that wants to get rid of mainly the wife that wants to get rid of her husband's mom that's living with them to ship her off somewhere, and the mom just does not want to go. And she feels like, like they're shipping her off to take her money or to take her house and stuff like that. And that's actually a really interesting part of this book. Mainly because you have a lady who like maybe out of everybody we meet in this book has like a definite will to live. Like out of everybody we meet in this book has like a will to live that is so much more than everybody else we meet. Everybody else we meet in this book is like depressed and sad and like doesn't want to do life anymore, and they're sad about life, and life has been rough. And not that the old lady's life has been great, but she wants to live and she wants to go out on her own terms. She does not want to retire to a care facility. That story is really great, and they need Ferdinand to like kind of sign the papers to say like, hey, like she's not well, to take care of herself, so that way she can be shipped off. And like again, the brief glimpses of humanity, he doesn't do it, and I thought that was really great. He doesn't do it, and he's like, you guys got to deal with it yourself. And I think they even offer him money, but he does not do it. And later that comes back, and that couple recruits Robinson in this scheme that winds up with Robinson winding up like critically injured, because they basically try to kill the old woman with, I think, fireworks that go off in Robinson's face. And that's like a whole thing. And again, like without just like retelling the entire story beat for beat, that whole thing with Robinson, the couple, the old lady, is great. I really love it. How it ends is interesting, if not somewhat like, I want to say anticlimactic, but somewhat like, what was that? Like I don't want to say pointless, because like I always struggle with the criticism of that seemed pointless narratively, because like when a book is trying to emulate life, like I think this one's really going for as close as possible to like life from like point A to like the end, or whatever, point A to point B, I guess you could say. But when I feel like a narrative, whether that be a movie or a book, is trying to emulate life, I don't feel like it necessarily needs a point. I think that a point is a little like, I don't know, narrow. So that being said, I love that part of the story. I thought it was really good. I thought it was really, it was consistent. And again, from there, the book winds up with eventually Ferdinand not necessarily working in medicine, working at like kind of a madhouse, and from there, working in the madhouse, he ends up running it with Robinson, who winds up being like in a relationship with a lady that he met while he was while he was sick from his injuries from the explosion. And that kind of closes out our narrative without giving it away too much. I mean, like, I know I said spoilers, but at the same time, it's not... The thing about this book is, like, the book feels like a bunch of almost vignettes loosely connected. And so, like, again, if I were to say, like, how that ended, it would just be like, okay, and that ends like this. And, like, does that have any, like, implication on the larger story as a whole? Not really. Like, every phase of this book feels almost like a vignette, and maybe that is the point. Maybe that is, like, how this person saw life, is that it's a bunch of vignettes, is that nothing necessarily leads to anything, is that there is no narrative structure to life, which I agree with that. There's no, acts to life or whatever. There's no climax necessarily. So this book feels oddly disjointed, even though it is very narratively linear, but in a way that is almost rambling and disconnected. And in pieces, there's really good parts of this book. There's really good, solid writing. But as a whole, the book as an entire product is somewhat tiresome. It is too wordy. It is overblown. It is just very, very concerned with itself in a way that I found to be obnoxious. So, like, for example, this book reminds me of Crime and Punishment in that it has lots of monologues. But, unlike Crime and Punishment, the monologues aren't particularly written in a way that, like, end with salient points. A lot of the monologues in here feel rambly. They feel not necessarily written that well. And maybe it's a translation issue. That's the thing, is it could totally be a translation issue in this book. But I found that, like, there would be monologues for, like, several pages that are, like, not exactly deepening the point that the monologue started with. It's just saying the same thing over and over. And that's the thing, is, like, if you read about half this book, you read about 50% of this book, you'd understand what the book's saying, generally speaking, if I did. I did read the afterword, and the guy that did the afterword was praising the book and praising the author and things like that in a way that felt like this book is, like, like, in the most, like, non-ironic way. This book is metal. It just doesn't care. It just doesn't care. And, I agree with that. This book does not care. And I don't know if you want to read a book that does not care. This book is not concerned with necessarily being written in a way that is entertaining. The book's not concerned necessarily with having a tight narrative structure. The book's not concerned with much of anything other than, like, the misery of its main character. And even then, that topic is very much overblown, and this could have been shorter. So I guess I'll start with some positives about this book. I've kind of touched on those a little bit throughout this, but essentially the writing is good. When it's good, it's good. When the writing is good, it's really good. There's a lot of good quotes in here. There's a lot of salient points in here that I did thoroughly enjoy. The problem is that they're too far and few in between for the page count. I found the writing at certain points to be bland and to be more concerned that, like, it's like intent. Like, I feel like the author felt like the intent of its message is greater than the delivery of said message. And I can't get through that. And I did finish the book. I wanted to quit it. I wanted to quit this book so many times. It's also very small print, so you can kind of see how tiny the print is there. It's very, like, tiny print. Sorry, my memory card got filled up. But basically, I guess in conclusion with this book, and again, this book took me several months to read, mainly because I did not enjoy it. It was long. And yeah, so this book took me several months to read, so I don't think I'm, like, necessarily the best to talk about it in its entirety and in its full substance, because I think I missed a lot of things. So if you did read this book and you got something out of it and you found that you enjoyed something from it, please talk about it in the comments, because I missed it. I missed like why this book is a good book. I see the bits of brilliance, but like at the same time, it's just so few. Like, it's so little. I marked a few things, but the book just does not have the substance to justify this page count. I did, unfortunately, buy 2 of this author's books. I bought Death on an Installment Plan as well, which I was going to read, like, next, but I don't know if I'll ever read that now. It looks longer, and I'm not a fan of this author. So currently I'm reading The Godfather. That's going very well. I plan to upload a review of that, but that's going really well. I have a bunch of reviews I recorded that I never uploaded that are like from, I don't know, 6 or more months ago. So I'll probably throw those up here too. This wasn't my best video by any means. Not to say I have a best video, but it was like really unstructured, really rambly. So I'm hoping that my next video for The Godfather, current book I'm currently reading, obviously, I'm hoping that will be a little bit more structured and better, because I plan to record the video as soon as I'm done. Whereas I finished this book a month ago and I wrote some notes about it, and then I'm kind of reiterating those notes. I'm a little blurry on the details. Not the best case for a book like this that is, I don't know, just a lot. But yeah, so if you read this book and you enjoyed it, please talk to me about what you enjoyed about it, what I missed, because I probably missed a lot. Maybe I even said some details wrong. So again, not my best video, but I still like talking about literature. So if you enjoyed this book and saw the satire in it, go ahead, leave a comment. I want to start uploading on this channel more. Life's been kind of busy. I'm just doing different things right now. But I got some comments on some of my old videos, and they're encouraging, so I definitely appreciate it. But yeah, that's everything. Have a great day. Subscribe. Thank you so much for viewing this very long video, which is probably 29 minutes of me rambling about this book, half of which is a recap. But yeah, let me know what you thought of it. If you haven't read it, let me know what you think about the author and things like that. If that's been a barrier to you reading it, it certainly would have been if I had known. But yeah, have a great day. Bye.